Hello everyone, and welcome to today's video. Today's video is a very special one as I have 5 Hmong haunted hotel stories to share with you all today. Before we get started, consider becoming a YouTube member by clicking that join button. Also, like and subscribe so I can support my adult beverage addiction. And without further ado, enjoy the show. A few years back, my husband and I were driving up to Wisconsin Dells with our 2 kids for a long weekend. Something we try to do every summer before school started back up. It's about a 4-hour drive from where we live, and we usually broke it up with a stop for dinner. But that particular trip, we got a late start and ended up deciding to just get a hotel for the night along the highway instead of pushing through in the dark with 2 tired kids in the back seat. We picked up a mid-range chain hotel just off of the interstate. Nothing fancy, the kind of place with an indoor pool and a breakfast buffet that families use as a halfway point on road trips like ours all the time. We got 2 connecting rooms, one for us and our youngest, and one for our older daughter, who was about 12 at the time and wanted her own space for once instead of sharing with her little brother. The rooms connected through a door in the wall between them, the kind you can unlock from both sides, so the whole thing basically becomes one bigger room if you want it to. Everything about check-in and settling in was completely normal. We got the kids fed, let them swim for a little bit in the pool downstairs, and got everyone into bed a little later than usual since it had been a long day of driving. I want to say we were asleep by around 11, and I didn't think twice about that room, the hallway, or any of it. It felt like any other hotel we'd stayed at over the years. I woke up sometime after 1 in the morning to what sounded like a baby crying, faint, coming from somewhere close by. My first thought, still half asleep, was that it was coming from another room down the hall, since walls in hotels like that aren't always great for sound. I laid there for a minute, telling myself it was probably just a family with a young kid a couple doors down, and that it would stop on its own the way things like that usually do. The room felt a little colder than it had been when we went to bed, enough that I pulled the blanket up higher without really thinking about it. It didn't stop right away. It kept going, on and off for what felt like several minutes, fading and then picking up again. I finally got up to check on our own kids, since the sound was bugging me enough that I couldn't fully relax back to sleep. Our son was sound asleep in the bed next to ours, not making a sound. I walked over to the connecting door to check on our daughter too, since her room was the one that the sound seemed closest to. And I found that the door was slightly opened, but not all the way, just cracked open a couple of inches, even though I remember locking it from our side before we all went to bed, mostly out of habit more than any real concern. I looked through the gap and saw my daughter still asleep in her bed, completely fine, nothing wrong at all. I pulled the door shut again, checked that it locked properly this time, and stood there for a second in the dark listening. The crying had stopped by then. I told myself that the door had probably just not caught the first time, and that locks like that can be weird in older hotels. So I went back to bed, even though it took me a while to actually fall back asleep. The next morning, I mentioned it to my husband over breakfast, mostly just as a passing comment about a rough night, not thinking that it was anything more than an odd noise and a sticky lock. He got a strange look on his face and told me that he heard the same crying too, at around the same time, but that he hadn't said anything because he figured that I was already asleep and didn't want to wake me up over what he assumed was just another guest's baby. When we compared what we remembered, the timing lined up almost exactly, and neither of us had actually seen or heard an actual baby anywhere in the hallway or breakfast area that whole stay. No stroller, no family with a young infant that we noticed at all. Later that day, while we were packing up the car, I mentioned it to the front desk clerk, mostly out of curiosity, asking if there were any families with young kids on our floor the night before. She checked something on her computer and told me that the room directly connected to ours on the other side, not our daughter's room, but the one beyond that, had actually been empty that whole night, no reservation at all. I didn't think much about it at that moment, more just filed it away as a strange coincidence. We finished loading up and headed to the water park like we planned. It wasn't until we got home and I mentioned the whole thing to my mother in law, almost as a funny road trip story. She just got quiet and told me that in hotels, especially older ones, you're supposed to knock on the door and say who you are out loud before walking in for the first night. You're not supposed to just swipe the keycard and walk straight in without a word, especially after dark. She said that it was something that they always believed whenever they traveled, and that it was meant to let anything that might have already been in the room there know that you weren't trying to intrude, and that you were just passing through. She asked if we heard anything else that was strange the rest of that stay, and I told her just that one night that we stayed there. I told her that we hadn't done anything like that knocking that she mentioned, and that we just walked in right away just like anybody normally would at a hotel. We've stayed at plenty of hotels since then without anything like that happening again, but we haven't gone back to that particular one, even though it's right along our usual route. It's not really a decision that we talked about out loud, we just started picking a different place to stop at on that same drive, and neither of us have ever brought it up ever going back. A few years ago, I traveled out to Fresno for Hmong New Year with my cousin, since her side of the family always goes big for it, and we figured it would be fun to make a trip out of it together. We booked a hotel not too far from the fairgrounds where the celebration was being held, one of those bigger hotels that fills up completely that time of year with families coming in from all over, since it's a pretty well-known gathering for a lot of people. We got in late on a Thursday night, checked in without any issues, and got settled into our room, which was on the 6th floor with 2 queen beds. My cousin and I aren't usually superstitious people, and neither of us thought anything of the room itself when we first walked in. Just a normal hotel room like you'd expect. Nothing unusual about the layout or the way that it looked. The first strange thing happened our second night there, after we'd gotten back from the evening festivities, pretty tired and ready to crash. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night because the TV had turned on by itself. Not loud, just enough that the light in low volume woke me up. I figured one of us had probably rolled over onto the remote, which had happened before at other hotels, so I just grabbed it off the nightstand, turned off the TV, and went back to sleep without waking up my cousin. It happened again the next night, except this time the remote wasn't anywhere near either of us. It was sitting on the desk across the room where we'd left it earlier that evening. I got up, turned off the TV again, and this time mentioned it to my cousin the next morning, mostly just venting about bad luck with the hotel electronics. She laughed it off and said that the hotel was probably just old and that the wiring was bad, which made sense to me at the time, so I didn't think much more of it. The third night was when things started to feel different. I woke up again in the middle of the night, but this time it wasn't the TV. It was a feeling like someone was standing near the foot of the bed, watching. I laid there for a second, telling myself it was probably just leftover grogginess from being half asleep. But when I finally worked up the nerve to look, I caught a glimpse in the mirror across from the bed of a shape standing there, just for a second, gone by the time I fully turned my head to look directly at the spot. My heart was pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. My ears were ringing a little in the silence afterward, and I couldn't make myself say anything out loud, not even to wake up my cousin. I didn't sleep much the rest of that night. In the morning, I told my cousin everything. The TV, the feeling, the shape in the mirror. She got quiet and admitted that she'd woken up briefly that same night too, around the same time as far as she could tell, feeling like something had brushed past the end of her bed, even though she had been tired and confused to fully process it until I brought it up with my own experience. We mentioned it to one of the aunties at the celebration later that day. She was an older woman who had been coming to that same New Year event for decades, and she didn't seem surprised at all. She told us that during Hmong New Year, a lot more than just people are traveling and gathering that time of year, and that hotels near big celebrations like that can sometimes end up with more than just paying guests staying in for them for a few nights. She said it wasn't something to be scared of exactly, but something to be aware of, and that we should keep our door locked and not leave food or drinks sitting out overnight in the room, which we really hadn't really thought about before. We finished out the rest of the trip without anything else happening, although neither of us slept quite as soundly the last couple of nights as we had the first. We'd been back to Fresno for New Year's a couple of times since then, but we specifically asked for a different hotel now, even though the one we stayed in that year is closer to the fairgrounds and would honestly be more convenient. My cousin brings it up every year when we are booking, half joking, but I know that neither of us is actually kidding about not wanting to stay there again. Hey guys, quick message before the next story. As you know, due to everyone's undying support, our channel has seen tremendous growth in the past few months in comparison to the years since this channel has been created. As our community grows closer to 10,000 subscribers, I'm hoping to work with potential sponsors to help this channel grow even faster. This will give me the chance to try out different video formats and ideas, as I hope to one day talk in front of a camera instead of being a faceless voice. So, if all things go well, you might get a face reveal from me in the near future. If you're interested or know anyone interested in partnering up with this channel, reach out to my email listed in the description below. Thank you so much to everyone for supporting this channel, and here's the next story. I travel for work a fair amount, mostly regional trips for a company that sends me out to different sites a few times a year, usually staying 3 to 4 nights at a stretch in whatever hotel is closest to wherever I'm working that week. I've stayed in enough hotels over the years that very little about them phases me anymore. Weird smells, thin walls, the noisy icy machines, none of that really bothers me the way it might bother someone who doesn't travel as often. This particular trip was in Minneapolis, a hotel I'd actually stayed at once before without any issues, so I didn't think twice about booking it again when the trip came up. I checked in on a Monday evening after a long day of travel. I got up to my room on the 9th floor and settled in for the night without much thought. The first couple nights were completely uneventful. Work during the day, room service, or a quick dinner out, and then back to the room to catch up on emails before bed. Nothing about the hotel felt off to me at all during that stretch. The third night was when I first noticed something strange. I was already in bed, close to falling asleep, when I heard a knock at my door. It was a few knocks in a row. I got up, checked the peephole, and didn't see anyone in the hallway. I figured it was probably someone at the wrong room, maybe realizing their mistake and walking off before I got to the door, which happens sometimes in hotels. I went back to bed and didn't think much more of it. The knocking happened again the next night, same time roughly close to midnight. This time I got to the door faster, and there was still nobody there when I looked out. I decided to open the door and look down the hallway, and there was nobody there. But I did notice that the Do Not Disturb sign, which I always hang on my door out of habit, had been flipped around to the other side that says, "Please make up room," even though I hadn't touched it since hanging it up that afternoon. I mentioned it to the front desk the next morning, mostly just curious if there'd been a mix-up with room assignments or a housekeeping issue overnight. The clerk checked something on her screen and told me that according to their system, nobody had used a keycard to access my floor at all during that time overnight except for me, which didn't really explain the knocking or the sign, but she didn't have any other explanations to offer either. That same day, working in a shared conference room at the site I was visiting, I mentioned the whole thing to a colleague I was working with, mostly just as a way to pass time between meetings. The two of us laughed about it, and he also shared his own strange encounters too, staying at a different hotel. The last night that I was there, I woke up at around 3 in the morning with a strong feeling that someone was in the room with me. Once my eyes adjusted, I realized that I was completely alone. My chest felt tight, almost like I couldn't get a full breath in, and it took a few minutes of just sitting up and focusing on breathing normally before that feeling passed. I didn't hear any knocking that night, but I didn't fall back asleep easily either, and I ended up just leaving the lamp on for the rest of the night. I checked out the next morning without saying anything more to the front desk about it, mostly because I didn't feel like I had anything concrete enough to report. I've stayed at other hotels in the same city since then for work without any issues at all, but I specifically avoid booking that particular one now, even when it would be the more convenient option location-wise. I never did get any kind of explanation for the knocking or the sign flipping itself, and at this point I've stopped expecting one. This story isn't my own experience. Instead, it's my coworker's experience when she used to work at a hotel. Here's what she told me. I've worked housekeeping at the same hotel for almost 6 years, cleaning anywhere from 12 to 16 rooms a shift depending on how busy the week is. I started right out of high school, mostly because it was steady work close to home, and I never really planned on staying this long. But the schedule works well with my life now, and I've gotten really good at it. It's steady work, and after this many years, you get pretty used to the rhythm of it. Stripping the beds, cleaning the bathroom, restocking everything, moving to the next room. Most of the days just blend together, and nothing about the job feels unusual most of the time. There's one room on the 4th floor though, room 411, that's always stood out to me, even before anything strange happened. It's a normal room, same layout as every other room on that floor, but for as long as I've worked there, other housekeepers have quietly traded that room off their assignment list whenever they could, and I never really thought to ask why, until I started noticing things myself. The first time I noticed anything odd was a morning when I went in to clean 411 after a guest had checked out, and I found that the bed was already made, the pillows were arranged neatly, and nothing left was behind at all, even though the front desk had told me that the room needed a full clean and reset for the next guest. I figured maybe housekeeping from the night before had already gotten to it, and it just hadn't been marked off properly in the system. So I did a quick pass anyway and moved on without thinking much of it. It happened again a few weeks later, except this time I knew that for a fact nobody had been assigned to that room that morning, since I checked the schedule myself before starting my rounds. The bed was made the same way, tucked in tight, pillows squared off, like it had never been slept in at all, even though our system showed that somebody had checked out of that room just that morning. After that, I started noticing that the curtains in the room were a little strange too. I would fully close them before leaving, the way we were trained to for privacy between guests, and when I'd come back to do a final check before marking the room ready, they'd be open again, just a few inches, every single time, no matter how carefully I closed them. I told myself that it was probably just old curtain tracks that didn't hold well, since the hotel is older and plenty of things needed maintenance that never quite gets around to happening. There was also a cold spot by the window in that room, noticeably cooler than the rest of the space, even in the middle of summer with the air conditioning barely running. I mentioned it to a coworker of mine, who's worked there longer than I have, close to 15 years at that point. She didn't seem surprised at all, and that she's always made it a habit to just walk in there and clean up and mind her own business. She said that she'd noticed the same curtain thing herself years ago when she used to get assigned that room more often, and that she'd learned to just stop fighting it and accept that that room did its own thing sometimes. I started doing the same thing after that, more out of curiosity than real belief at first, knocking even on rooms marked vacant and saying out loud that I was there to just clean. Whether it actually made a difference or not, I couldn't tell you for sure. But the room did seem to settle down a little after I started. The curtains stayed shut more often than not, though never completely reliably. I asked our maintenance supervisor about the room once. He was an older guy who had been with the hotel even longer, and he told me, somewhat reluctantly, that a guest had passed away in that room years before either of us started working there. It was an older man who had been traveling alone and had a heart attack in his sleep, who was found by housekeeping the next morning during a routine check. He didn't have a lot of other details, just that it happened and that it was the kind of thing that gets talked about quietly among longtime staff but never officially acknowledged to the guests. That was what my coworker told me when she used to work there. But ever since she got this job now, she no longer wishes to go back. I worked the night audit shift at a hotel for about 2 years, usually 11 at night until 7 in the morning, handling late check-ins, answering the phone, and running the overnight accounting reports that had to get done before the day shift came on. I took the job mostly because it paid a little better than the day shift positions, and I've always been more of a night shift person anyway. Someone who works better when the building is quiet and I'm not getting interrupted every few minutes. Most nights were quiet, especially on weekdays. Sometimes hours would go by without a single guest coming through the lobby. Just me, the front desk, and whatever was playing quietly on the lobby television. The hotel had 8 floors, and the top floor, the 8th, had been closed off for renovations for months by the time I started. It was blocked off with a sign by the elevator saying that the floor was inaccessible and under construction. The elevator itself was still programmed to stop there if someone pressed the button, mostly because maintenance hadn't gotten around to disabling it yet, even though nobody was supposed to be up there at all outside of the renovation crew during the day. The first strange thing I noticed was maybe 2 months into the job, sitting at the front desk at around 2 in the morning when the little display above the elevator doors lit up, showing it moving floor by floor up toward the 8th floor, even though I hadn't called it and hadn't seen anyone walk past the desk toward it. I figured maybe the renovation crew had left something running, or a guest from a lower floor had pressed 8 by mistake and then gotten off somewhere else before I noticed. I made a note of it in the log, more out of habit than real concern, and went back to my reports. It kept happening every so often after that, always late at night. Always the elevator heading up to the 8th on its own without anyone visibly requesting it. A few times I checked the lobby camera footage the next morning just out of curiosity, and never saw anyone near the elevator bank at the times it happened, just an empty lobby and the display quietly climbing floor by floor before coming back down again a few minutes later. About 3 months in, I was doing a walk through the first floor for a routine security check, something we did every couple hours overnight, when I heard what sounded like someone walking on the floor above me. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving across the ceiling in a section that should have been an empty conference room at that hour. I stood still and listened for a minute, telling myself that it was probably just the building settling in or pipes expanding and contracting with the temperature change overnight, which our maintenance guy had mentioned before as a normal thing in older buildings. The footsteps stopped right as I was about to head up and check, and when I did go up to look, the conference room was locked and dark, exactly the way I had left it earlier that shift. The clearest thing that happened to me directly was toward the end of my time working there. I was reviewing the overnight security footage as part of my regular shift routine, mostly a formality, when I noticed on the 8th floor camera, the one still running even though the floor was supposed to be empty, a shape moving slowly down the hallway before stepping out of frame near the far end, where the stairwell was. I rewound it a few times to make sure I wasn't imagining it, and there it was every time, just a shape. No clear features, moving at a normal walking pace like anyone would through a hallway. I mentioned it to the day shift manager when she came in that morning, and she didn't seem at all that surprised. More casual than anything. She told me that an older employee, someone who had been working there long before either of us, used to say that that floor had always felt off, even before the renovation started, and that a guest had gone missing from that floor years earlier under circumstances nobody on staff really talked about anymore. No confirmed explanation, just a old creepy story that kind of got passed down quietly among lifetime employees the same way that these kind of things tends to do. I kept working there for a while longer after that, but I stopped doing my walkthroughs anywhere near that end of the first floor, and I definitely stopped looking too closely at the elevator display whenever it lit up on its own overnight. I eventually moved on to a different job for reasons that had nothing to do with any of this, but I still think about that hallway footage sometimes, and I never did get any real explanation for what the shape was or where it went once it stepped out of frame. Do you guys think that a haunted hotel is worse or a haunted Airbnb? A haunted Airbnb is worse. Because me personally, I'm not too sure what I'd pick, but if I had to pick one, I think that a haunted Airbnb would be a lot more scarier. Just because the ghost could be anywhere. You know, it could be like making noises in the kitchen, in the bedroom, in the bathroom. Whereas the hotel, it's usually just stuck in that hotel room. But I don't know. Let me know what you guys think about the video in the comment section below. Consider becoming a YouTube member. And remember to leave a like and subscribe. We're so close to 10,000 subscribers. Thank you everyone for watching.